Hello, Vape Village, and welcome to another fabulous interview. Today we've got a really special guest coming from across the water. I was going to say across the pond, but that's a very European, I don't know what that is. So today we've got Pip Tinning from the New Zealand Association for the Teaching of English. She was one of the first people that we got in contact with when this entire episode in our lives started. And she was really kind to share with Kate Gillespie and I some of the reflections, and I sat in on some excellent professional learning. So we're really keen to have her today. So good morning, Pip, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, kia ora, Ernest. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that.
So tell us a little bit about what remote teaching has looked like for you and other members of your organisation.
I think the biggest thing about it is how steep a learning curve it's been for a lot of our teachers. It's been quite jarring, I think is probably a good word for it. I think in fairness, we've been quite lucky. The government's been really mostly quick to respond, and I know that's not the reality for all our teachers across Aotearoa, but you know, we've got devices out to kids as quickly as possible. We've tried as hard as possible to get internet access, and for those that just hasn't been a possibility, there's been, you know, hard pack stuff going out. So for teachers, it's been really difficult, but also I think we're all blown away by how quickly everyone just responded, jumped on board, sorted out PD. I think we had PD up and running for free for any teacher who wanted it, with limited numbers, unfortunately, within a week. But then we made those recordings free as well. So it's been tough, but I just, you know, I think we have to be incredibly proud of how practitioners have just adapted so incredibly quickly. And I think, you know, it's a real testament to how much we should be trusting our teachers to just get on with it, eh?
Absolutely. And I think, I've seen the same thing talking to our members all across Victoria. It's been amazing. And I think we know that from working in schools. We know how adaptable and sort of resourceful teachers and other educators have to be. You sort of touched right at the end on what my next question was going to be, which is what you think some of the takeaways from this period, because obviously we're going to transition back into a sort of vaguely regular programming life, and we'll get to that in a moment. But what do you think some of the things you might take away from this period are?
I think a lot of the discussion on different forums is how we can actually take some positives out of it and look at maybe some more flipped learning in our classrooms, and how we can be possibly a bit more flexible with our programs, clearly flexible with our assessment. There's been a lot of different, even Facebook pages and different forums popping up to look at how we can move forward with that. And one of the biggest things that I think came out, big things, was the inequities that are sitting in our society. And, you know, a lot of members got in contact with us to outline how concerned they were with how inequitable this was going to be for a lot of kids. And I think that's something that we really need to take out of it. How do we look at full access to education as a right rather than for certain privileges? And I think that's something that, well, obviously I'm a little bit of a social, well, let's get into it. But I think, you know, a lot of our teachers are sitting in that space, and that is something I think we need to take out of it really carefully. But, you know, even our practice, what have we taken, what can we do differently that's going to be valuable for all of us? You know, I think I've read different articles about kids with social anxiety, that for some of them, actually, this has been, you know, a little bit groundbreaking for them. So, you know, we've got opportunities that we can take out of something that, let's face it, was a bit of a disaster in the grand scheme of things. So, yeah, I'd love to be able to be fully positive about it, but we'll see. The cynic in me isn't entirely convinced.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things I've been reflecting on a lot is that we're going to need to give ourselves space to sort of digest and reflect on some of these things as we go forward. Because I think like you touched on, the same experience over here, that a lot of the things which have always existed in terms of the inequalities across the education sector and society more broadly are just exposed in a much starker way with the virus. But I do think as well, a lot of the things that many practitioners have been pushing for a long time, like the flipped learning, etc., but that hasn't sort of got the traction. I think, we've shown that it can happen on a pretty broad scale now. So I think it's got the potential to be revolutionary if we sort of, take it in the right way.
And I think, we've got to look at how, I don't think I'm going to get over how quickly everyone just was like, all right, we don't have a lot of choice, let's just jump into it. And they did it. And I think, we should be so incredibly proud of our teachers. I'm sure there's a lot of parents out there going, oh, you people. And I look at my own kids at home working through that. So my son's come back from uni, he's remote learning. My daughter's been, Zoom lessons every single day, and looking at other people's practice, it's like, okay, I need to up my game for starters. But it's amazing how well, people have just flipped and adapted. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one thing for me, we connected with you quite early in this process. And I think, we're obviously a state-based organisation, but certainly it's brought down a lot of the barriers with other state and territory-based organisations here, as well as internationally. And I think that's got the potential to be really positive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, I think it was about 5 or 6 scholarships to send to the Australian Association's conference, because we've had to cancel ours, which is gutting. But it's also such a cool opportunity to have sort of those greater ties trans-Tasman, but also up and down the country. I think that's something that I'd love to see NZATE, for starters, build on moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think I've had a lot more contact with some of our rural and regional members, through the digital technology, which I must admit I'm very sick of seeing my own face and hearing my own voice. But nonetheless, it has meant that I've been able to make contact with some of those communities that I wouldn't necessarily be able to make contact with on regular programming. So my big question now, you're a little bit closer than we are to a return to the bricks and mortar classroom.
Yeah.
What is that looking like for you? How are you feeling about it? What are some of the conversations that have been happening?
Personally, I'm freaking out slightly. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. And I think it's just because it's been so long since I've actually, had to drive the 20 minutes, half an hour to work. But I also, they are big changes. We've had big changes going into digital distance learning. And it's just going to be another big change going back into the classroom. But I just, I miss the banter with my colleagues. I miss the banter with our students. And I think everyone's, like that. And I think the biggest, not necessarily challenge, but maybe the thing that we need to be incredibly mindful is, our government spent a lot of time saying, be kind to each other. But I think the first thing we're going to need to do when we go back on Monday is actually be kind to ourselves. This is going to be another big shift back into classrooms. They're going to be set up with social distancing. We're not to get into anyone's breath space, which I am perfectly okay with anyway.
Workplace hugs is really one of the things I'm positive about with this experience.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because, after those big Christmas breaks and stuff, the first thing that we do is we go in and we hug our co-workers. I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you? And that's going to be really weird. And asking kids to stay away from each other. We've asked teenagers to literally live their worst nightmare for 2 months. You cannot go and hang out with your friends. You literally are not allowed to do that. And just, the trauma that those poor kids have gone through.
Absolutely.
We'll have to deal with that. So I think, the first couple of first week at least is going to be a lot of whakawhanaungatanga, that sense of building those relationships and those bonds back up, and the sense of trust back up, because we've also had kids who we haven't seen for 7 weeks. They have not engaged, and that's going to be a toughie. And, you know, I guess often our first instinct is, where have you been? I think it'd be really unfair to go on that attack, and rebuild a love of going to school as well, because that's going to be quite huge for a lot of them. They, you know, we have students who have hated this digital learning platform. We need to get them back into that sort of sense of normality, but with that, you know, that manaaki, that care and that real consideration for how they're feeling, but also how we're feeling.
Absolutely. I think I was just listening to our national broadcaster this morning, and they were talking about some of the domestic violence statistics during this period, which have been absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
Knowing that, you know, those are going to be the experiences of some of our young people coming back into classrooms.
And our teachers.
Exactly. And so I think it's interesting that a lot of the conversation in Victoria has been about assessment, because particularly in our senior years, our assessment process is quite regimented. It's usually done under exam conditions. People are understandably very anxious about how to get that done. And that is a completely understandable anxiety a lot of our members are feeling. But then on the other hand, they've got this this question of, I guess, the trauma that the young people and themselves have been through, and trying to juggle all those things is a lot. And so I think what you're saying is absolutely correct, that there's going to need to be a lot of care and consideration going into the next little period.
Yeah. And figuring out how we still get our kids over the line, because, you know, we still have big old lines in the sand that we need to get them over. But how do we do it that means that we're not putting more pressure on them? Because, you know, the student voice from my school in particular, so, you know, we haven't got student voice from across the country. But over two thirds of our kids said we've either got too much or far too much work. So we forget that they don't just come to English. They have literally 5 classes in a day where they've been given stuff to do. And so, you know, I warned mine. I said, you think this is bad, you wait till you get back. Because whilst, you know, we've got things to do. We've got assessments to do. We've moved our exams back 10 days. But it's 10 days, Ernest. So, yeah, I think it's just going to be a big juggling act. But if this has taught us anything, it's that we are pretty invincible. And we take what's thrown at us and we make the most of it, and we just kick into it. And I just think, what an amazing learning curve.
Absolutely. It's really, really great to hear the experiences that you've had, your members have had. I think the overwhelming response from our membership when I've been doing these interviews has been, it's just so reassuring to hear other people voice their experiences and anxieties and concerns. So I think that is a very important part of sharing our practice, is sharing, I guess, that sense of worry, because ultimately we're all in it for the students. We want them to do the absolute best, and any manifestation of our anxieties is generally around, as you say, getting them across that line. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to keep this relationship up and continue to build it. I want to come and visit you one day.
No, I'm in the Bay of Plenty. My school's 5 minutes walk from the beach. You come and see me, Ernest.
Yeah, it seems when we're allowed, it does seem very enticing, that's for sure. I have to put in a good word to Kate about, we'll put together a program.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure our members are going to be very excited to hear all of this news from you. So thank you again.
Cool. Thank you, Ernest.